Hello, good morning. Welcome to Quantitative Methods in Psychological Science, which is, it turns out, a way to use 14 syllables to say statistics. So, you're welcome. Your tuition dollars hard at work. First of all, my apologies. I think you hopefully have seen my messages from earlier in the week that I had intended to get a video put together and sent out and shared with you guys much more quickly than this. What I can say for those of you who are parents out there, I have 5-year-old twins. So there. If you don't have kids, I think the best I can kind of do is if you've seen the now famous internet meme of the cartoon dog sitting in a room where absolutely everything around him is ablaze and on fire, and he's just saying, "This is fine. Everything's fine." That's roughly what I'm looking at here. At any rate, it is now Friday at least, and of 0 week, and so I did want to get this out to welcome you to the course, to expand a bit. I know in the first week, I always say like everyone's getting syllabused to death, and so there's a logical ceiling effect that happens when you're trying to sludge through these syllabi and through the Canvas explanations and trying to extract what is the relevant information, what's the important information, what's the stuff that you need. So I'm going to try, hopefully, in this video and in subsequent things that I'll share with you all, to parse that out a bit and make things a little more clear. All of that, but always, of course, reach out if something isn't, if you have questions, whatever along the way, and I'll come back to that soon enough. At any rate, welcome to the course, despite the fact that I'm going to go ahead and bet that this isn't probably the course you've been looking forward to the most. It's a well-known secret, right, that frequently those who are either on the path of a psychology major or kind of the social sciences in general, very frequently, not only is there a sense of statistics they're not relevant. I'm never going to do research or become a statistician, so it's like this necessary evil, this fiery hoop I have to jump through, alongside usually kind of statistics anxiety, which is a real thing. Go search the literature. There are countless things out there published on the anxieties and the stress and the things like that that go into sometimes just statistics, but of course just mathematics more generally. And so I'm going to do my best to assuage your anxieties if they indeed are there, and also hopefully to disabuse you of the notion that this content is just an esoteric kind of thing for researchers to know about and things like that. We could dive into, I won't, but the fact that the world that we live in now is data driven. We live in a world where big data analysis and algorithms and just about everything that we work with on a daily basis now is couched firmly in the world of statistical analysis. And of course, we wouldn't begin the scope of a course like this, doesn't even start to touch at those things. But at the very least, we get a level of fluency, right? We start to get in to understand a little bit about the logic, the language, and hopefully a lot of also about how to interpret these things. So I will also make the argument as we do all of that irrespective of what your final goals are with a career, with your education, with whatever path that you're on, I genuinely, firmly, fervently believe that this is amongst the most important courses. Even if you're going to do counseling, even if you're going to be a researcher, even if you're going into business or like fill in the blank, I don't care. This stuff is profoundly important. So I'll do my best in the coming weeks and months to sort of sell you on that idea. But a quick thing to speak to, just in a general way, about the anxiety maybe around the mathematical pieces of this. You hopefully have spent a little bit of time in the Canvas shell, navigated around a little bit, gone over the syllabus, got at least a feeling of what this course kind of looks like. And if you have, you've maybe noticed it feels a lot less mathy than a lot of other mathematics courses. This is not a course in which, like when I took statistics back in 1923 or whenever the hell it would have been, where you sit down, here's your data set. I want you to run a one-way analysis of variance, and you have to sit down and go by hand and do the entire equation and all the steps and make sure you get all your decimals right. And that we're not doing anything remotely like that. We actually are going to be approaching this a little bit more philosophically, perhaps, than we are in this sort of number crunching fashion. And as I talk, hopefully that'll become more apparent what I sort of mean by that. But one of the things I've done for years now, at least usually when I was doing face-to-face courses, which is usually what I would do, I would start with a quote. I'd be right there in the syllabus, and I'd start with a quote. And the one that I actually liked the best for statistics was, at least it's attributed to B.F. Skinner, the behaviorist. But it is, in essence, it is education is what remains when what has been learned has been forgotten, which, it's very abstract, very philosophical. But what I take that to mean is that in any course, but most especially one like statistics, we're going to dive deep. We are going to get down into what are descriptive statistics, how do we use those to go into hypothesis testing, what is an ANOVA versus a t-test versus a chi-square, we are going to get down in the weeds a bit. But that the big picture, like ultimately what I'm hoping is that when we emerge from the class, it isn't that you're going to know by rote memory how to sit down and do a paired samples t-test on the back of an envelope, but that you understand the logic of what is a t-test doing. What are results when you are going through papers from here on out, or when you're even reading things in the popular media, provided they actually give you any data. How do you interpret them? What do they mean? Where do they come from? Those are the things that are the most important. And so, what's remained when what has been learned has been forgotten. I guess I always come back to the idea that I could take students from my previous terms who have worked through statistics and were just stellar, right? The A+++ kinds of students who are now have gone on to doing other things. And if I run into them down at the Fred Meyer and we're in conversation, I'm like, great, here's a piece of paper, do a one-way analysis of variance with this data set. I don't anticipate that student would actually be able to do it. But what I do anticipate is that in the classes that they're now taking, or in the graduate program that they're now in, or in their practice where they're going to the literature and trying to understand best practices, whatever the case may be, they can read about a study. They can see, this is how they sampled. They worked with these individuals. This is how they measured things. Understanding something about variables and how they're put together. How do we quantify these things? And then, if you've ever had the pleasure of going through an academic paper or research paper at this point, prior to a class like this, frequently what people do is they get down, they read what was done, this and that, and they get down to the results section, which is the actual meat. Here's what we found, and just skip right the hell over that, because it's just a bunch of numbers. F was this, D, F was that, okay, I don't know what the hell that symbol is. But the student who I ran into at Fred Meyer, who couldn't just do the analysis on a piece of paper at that particular moment, they still can go to those papers, understand something about what was measured, read through that results section, and they know what it's about. They know what these data are telling them. They don't have to get down into the discussion and really even have the researcher say, this is what we interpret this to be, because you start to have that level of sophistication of being able to interpret these data for yourself. So that's my hope, is that rather than being a great little number cruncher, we're going to be able to walk away from this with greater fluency in all of science, not just the social or behavioral sciences, and be able to speak the language and converse, and yes, you get the idea. I'm rambling at this point. So I guess I should introduce myself, since I'm sort of guiding the ship for this term, for better or worse. I am Christopher Collins. I live up here in Portland with my little family. My background's actually in behavioral neuroscience and comparative animal behavior. So you're going to probably see bits of that. This course isn't geared towards anything in particular, but it's unavoidable when I'm giving examples or, speaking to things that, I kind of go to what's familiar. So you might see a little bit of that along the way. Or if you're just curious what the hell I spend my time doing, it's that sort of a thing. So let's do some of the meat and potatoes stuff about the class. As I said, hopefully you are becoming familiar with what kind of the syllabus lays out, what you're finding in the Canvas shell. Quickly, I suppose, where should I begin? Let's start with the perusal piece, because that's probably a new thing to you all. It was new to me just recently. So we're all kind of wading into this together to some degree. I guess to be clear about what sort of the expectations around perusal look like. We're going to be doing a number of different readings you've already seen. As you go through, it provides the document for you, and then much like you would do track changes or something like that in a Word document. You go through, you select regions, you select the parts of the readings that are interesting, disturbing, you don't understand. I mean, there's any number of reasons, actually. You might select things throughout the document, and then you're going to do some form of commentary on those. Now, there's some guidance as to what that looks like as you're reading through, but of course, it's much like the same thing when I'm describing a discussion forum to students. There isn't a huge expectation that everybody's going to rush down to like a results section and take the t-value and the effect size and have these tremendous amazing insights as to what these data suggest, it's nothing of the sort. It's hopefully you're getting into the readings and you're doing some level of interpretation, some level of analysis. You can speak to the sampling, you can speak to how did they get their data, you could speak to, genuinely any of it. It's really just a matter of, is what you're saying substantive in some fashion? Is it, it's not enough to say, that's interesting, or what does this mean? That's perfectly fine, and if you genuinely don't know what something is, pose the question, because as you're seeing, this is going to be a document to which we all are sort of coming in and having a collective conversation about it. And so novelty will be good in that regard, just reiterating what somebody else points out or says or asks about. It's not really substantive, right? But this also speaks to, and I'll come back to this with everything we're going to talk about, the sort of due dates surrounding these things. While there's not going to be a hard and fast due date at which things get closed off, we're trying to have flexibility, accommodation, that sort of a thing. As you go into these documents and want to add your commentary, there's definitely something to be said for getting there a little bit earlier on, right? Because the world is your oyster at that point in terms of your contributions. What do you want to speak to? All of that. As you get later and later and later in the game, a lot of those maybe lower fruit, right? The easier things to point out, talk about, those things are already going to be scooped up. It's going to be a little more challenging to have some originality with your contributions there. But as I was just saying a moment ago, that really we're more interested in the overall kind of philosophical nature of what are these statistical analyses about, what are they telling us, where are they coming from, how confident can we be with them, where are some of the flaws. There's a lot that goes into it that isn't just, did you calculate out to the fourth decimal and that sort of thing. So that's what the perusal thing's going to be all about, and it is kind of the place where we will more collectively come together to kind of have conversations about these examples and hopefully kind of applying, the rationale of the stuff that we're covering a little bit to it, for what it's worth. Then we also have the labs that are associated here. And I guess I would relate this back to a bit what I was saying about how we're not going to be doing this pencil and paper, sitting down, calculating out, show your work kind of thing. We're going to be using this program called JASP, which is a free software program. It's if you have any familiarity with these for any reason, it's very much like SPSS, which is one of the more common statistical packages that we use in the behavioral sciences and the like. But it's gonna build on itself, lab by lab by lab by lab. We're gonna be taking data, working with it primarily in sort of within the software itself, and doing the analyses, collecting our data, organizing our data, doing the various kinds of analysis. And it's really it's been put together in such a way where it should be just a step by step by step by step kind of working through it. So there are sort of tutorials and some guidance and descriptions and instructions, and there's all manner of these things that you'll find as you're becoming familiar with. You're going to have to use Perusall, and you're going to have to use JASP, and you're going to have to use Canvas. I know there's a lot of moving parts. I hope that all of the resources there are adequate and are helpful and allow you to feel comfortable, using these various pieces. But I recognize completely, like, this is probably all new stuff to pretty much all of you, and so please do use the resources that are available. They should get at most of the things that you need. But of course, if you want to or need to, you can always reach out to me. I'm less an IT person, right? I know less about how these platforms work and how to do some of the technical issues as I do about the actual analyses and the science side of things. But I always do my best, and sometimes there are things that are consistently coming up, and so hopefully I can be helpful in that regard. Remains to be seen, right? Last bit, sort of the quizzes that are going to be going throughout each of the weeks. You'll notice we're not doing exams in here. You're welcome. It's really going to depend a lot more on these more, what would you call them, lower stakes kinds of things. So doing the Perusall annotations, doing the labs and the JASP software work, and then doing these quizzes that are going to relate more directly to the readings that are coming out of our digital text. The questions pertain directly to the things that are in the readings, the things that we're talking about. They are constructed in such a way where they are primarily just multiple choice kinds of questions that you would be A, B, C, D, probably very familiar with. But each also has kind of short answer questions that are associated with them as well. Those are going to vary tremendously based on what kind of content we happen to be covering at any given time. But do know on the front end, they're not going to be super complex. Again, going back to this idea of sit down and run through all these calculations, show me your work, that sort of thing. They're going to be more applied. And so, as we're talking about specifically how do you achieve type 1, type 2 errors and these various analyses, and what would that look like with this sort of a p-value or that sort of a thing, that's all well and great. The kind of question you would see on a quiz then is not so much the nitty-gritty of type 2 error and a paired samples t-test, blah, blah, blah. It's, do you understand overall, conceptually, what would a type 2 error look like compared to a type 1 error, just in any situation? So it's more conceptual, a little bit more applied, which often people don't like when it comes to exams and quizzes and things like that in other courses, but in a statistics course, you'll probably find yourself pretty happy that it's those kinds of questions rather than the just number crunching stuff. There's maybe a couple of you number cruncher people in the class, and I do apologize because you're just, I know. Anyway, one last bit, since we're kind of going through the laundry list of what are the points, where do they come from, how do they work. The last thing you'll see on there, again, in lieu of doing exams or some big final or something like that, is this thing called your project, which is less well defined, and quite frankly is something I don't want to spend a bunch of time on right now here at the front end, because the term will fly by. We'll get there faster than any of us wants to believe. But it's going to make a lot more sense as we approach. We're not even going to start that path until going into week 8, at which point I will give you a lot more information about what that looks like, what the expectations are, etc. For now, know that we're more or less going to set those last couple of weeks of the course aside for, instead of diving in doing all the minutia and the sort of stuff, or prepping for the final and studying and that, you'll be doing plenty of that for your other classes. This is going to be some project, some creation of your own making that takes aspects of what we've done over the weeks leading up, and then applying it. And I won't even give examples right now. There's too many, because there's just, it can be just about anything, honestly. But I'll provide examples of what those have looked like in the past, and I'll give instructions and everything like that as the time becomes closer. But know that it's not remotely going to be something like a final exam. It's going to be putting something together that is new, that is a creation of your own, that utilizes concepts or ideas or examples of things within the quantitative world. And basically, between that, perusal, the labs and JASP, and the quizzes, that's it. And hopefully, in thinking about it in those terms, without the exams, without the high stakes pressure, again, when I took this 5,000 years ago as statistics, our grades more or less came out of like, here you take a midterm, here you take a final, and you sure as hell better do it right. This is designed to take so much of that heat, that pressure off of those situations. Quizzes and labs and the work that you're doing, you can have your book, have your notes, have this stuff available so that you have those tools available to you, right? It's not a matter of, can you memorize what goes into this equation or that equation, those sorts of things. All right, where am I at here? I've been talking at you for over 20 minutes, a while. I think for the time being, that probably covers more than enough on your end of things. Hopefully, I hope that clarifies a bit about what these things are going to look like going forward, what to expect out of them, what I'm expecting out of you. As always, if this doesn't address specific questions or anything like that, I'm always around and available. So the easiest way is pretty much always via email with me. But that being said, I'm always available for this kind of a thing: video chats and Zoom, phone conversations, whatever's going to make the most sense for you all. One of the things that I've taken to doing in the past year, couple years, whatever it's been, is sort of in lieu of sending out emails the way I typically would. You'll still get emails from me, of course, but often if they would be these sort of long, explanatory, detail-oriented sorts of messages, I'm nothing if not verbose. I talk a lot, and subsequently I write a lot too. And so instead of slogging through like a miniature novel of dense ass material and trying to get what you need out of it, I've typically just kind of been putting these videos together where I can speak to whatever it is, answer questions, give more details and clarification and this sort of a thing. And on the whole, I've gotten good feedback about that a person can just kind of click on the video and or the audio or whatever I send, kind of go about what they're doing otherwise and just listen to me ramble on about whatever, but then you can extract what's relevant, what's meaningful, what do you need out of those, and rewind it, replay it, whatever. So anyway, I've also found myself doing that even often with just direct emails with individuals. When you get like 50 emails a day, it eats up a hell of a lot of time. And so I found it very efficient to be able to take a lot of my messages, just record a quick audio message, shoot that back your way so that you can just listen to it rather than typing everything out and all of that. Anyway, I just say that to kind of give you a heads up that to anticipate that. Like I say, most people like it, but that doesn't mean everybody. And so I do want, anybody, for instance, if that's not your preference, some people like to have kind of the paper trail thing, right? Something to go back to, make reference to, whatever. If that's your preference, let me know, because I could still absolutely type things out or do things those other ways, for what it's worth. So with all that, rambling, coffee-fueled, whatever I just threw at you, seriously welcome. I am excited to be able to work with you all this term, even if it is asynchronous and online and digitized in these things. It is what it is, and it still is hopefully going to be a really great experience. I'm excited to work with you in whatever capacity you want me to be, and yeah, here's to a great term. So take care of yourselves, stay safe, don't do anything I wouldn't do, and we'll be in touch. All right, cheers.